And here we go. Welcome to some live coaching on the Big Idea to Bestseller podcast. I got my man Caleb Mezzy coming in here to talk about his book idea, get some live coaching. We're going to go through this. We're going to get to know you, Caleb. We're going to get to understand you. We're going to get to answer your questions. And by the end of this, you're going to have a bunch of ideas on what to do next with your book. That is our objective today. And for those of you that are listening to this right now, I want you to think about how are these questions related to your big idea? How are these topics that we're going to cover possible for you? Because I want you to make your book happen, and we're going to jump right into it. So Caleb, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. Your energy is always contagious, and I'm happy to be one of those victims of your energy. I think the other thing I would want to say is I have a lot of ideas, so I think this fits perfectly into what you're, going to coach me on.
Awesome. So let's talk about this first. In your idea, in your mind, what makes you interested in writing a book? Because I know you've wanted to write one. Why are you interested in writing a book?
So I have three ideas that I can either, introduce now,
Okay.
just to answer that question. But I would say one is I have research and I've developed a model for career transition for athletes. So when they go into retirement, we have a developed model that I actually did my dissertation on, defended that successfully in 2021. So that would be one thing because I do have the framework, I do have the research, and I have the, I guess, credentials, to
Yep.
launch that. The other thing would be, and this is kind of like, I don't want to say a 180 turn here, but I think that a lot of buzz right now about mental health, well-being, and journaling is a great thing. I wanted to kind of take that athlete career transition moment, the idea that everybody's going through a transition at different points of their life, and take that into a 365-day journal. I know there's a lot of things that exist like that, but I think it's a really cool premise, probably easy to launch in, just 365 days, which doesn't seem like a lot to someone who writes, but when you're putting it together, it is. And then the last thing is a total different tangential thing, but it does go with the well-being and the mental health thing, which I believe. I'm a father of two, a 1 and 4-year-old. I don't know why I went in that order. And one of the things I realized about reading books to my kids, because I've done it since really they were born, even when they were in mother, is there's no books on mental toughness or physical toughness. It's always about unique, or we have these problems with these monsters, so we have to overcome them. So I wanted to create a character, which I already have, and I actually already wrote 45 children's books. I want to take those books and make them into a premise that can fit that demographic of children, because I've never done that before. I don't really know that, but then it's something that my kids can do with me and kind of own. So I'll leave it at that because I want to be a little vague for the rest of the coaching.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So it's great. So let's walk through these real quickly. You got three ideas. You have one idea, which is career coaching for athletes, essentially helping them transition from their sport, their identity of being an athlete, into the next version of their career, right?
Right.
And then from there, we have idea number two, which is more so about creating a journal for those same athletes, but creating a journal that will help with their mental health and help them dive deeper, right? Those are the two big ideas, correct?
Yes.
And then we have the third idea, which is the series of children's books focused around mental toughness, okay? For the topic of this conversation, what I want to do, Caleb, is I want to focus on the first two ideas more so than the idea on the children's books. And here's why. There's going to be a lot of things we can do to tie in idea one and idea two.
Yeah,
And then the
100%.
children's books are going to be a little bit separate. And to be fully transparent, children's books aren't our area of expertise, but I got a person for you that I'd be happy to introduce you to help you build those things to life. So let's
Perfect.
focus on the nonfiction books focused around helping athletes with their mental health and focus athletes with their career transition. Let me ask you this. When it comes to these books, doesn't matter which one, but what is your dream outcome of this? Is it to create a best-selling book? Is it to generate leads for a coaching business? Is it to do speaking engagements for college athletes? Like, what for you is the dream of why you want to create these books?
Yeah, I would say of the options you just gave me, 2 and 3 stand out first and foremost. I would say number one is great, but to me, that's a byproduct of 2 and 3. And that's just me thinking out loud. I think really like the generation of leads, but really people who are starting to understand this is my expertise. This is what I do. I'm an educator, so I'm coming at it from an education perspective. I think the other piece here is it's about when for me. So like it's not like, oh shit, I retired. Now let me read this book, or oh shit, I retired. Someone gave me this book. There's a process, right? And that's what the research has really said in a nutshell is it's a process. It's not an event or a moment. So getting the book in the hands of the people before that event or moment happens is a big thing. I don't know if that's a measurable outcome of what you were talking about, but I would say 2 and 3, and 1 would be a byproduct.
Okay, so we're looking here. We want to write these books to create massive impact for these athletes. And we want to do that so that we can create the opportunity to further work with these athletes, to understand them, to get to know them, and then to further work with them. And why do you want to work with them? So let me explain this and then you can answer. You want to work with them. We want to write this book to generate leads and awareness, to ultimately create a change that then leads to business on the back end for you at a further level of intimacy with these athletes to help them with their transition. When an athlete works with you, what do you want their result to be? Do you want it to be a successful transition from sports to quote unquote civilian life? Do you want it to be that they're fulfilled after sports? Do you want it to be that they've achieved a job at a certain pay grade? What are the outcomes that you hope to assist these athletes in achieving following them reading these books?
Sure. So I would say all the above classified as happiness. I
Okay.
mean, we understand so much, and I won't get into the entire transition process, but we understand a lot of what happens, right? So happiness can be defined in so many different ways, and we won't talk about like financial or anything like that. But if they're placed into a career, and I say career because not a job, but a career that they are happy, that they're able to successfully transition and transfer those skills that they learn from playing and their years in sports into something else. So to me, that is the way I would define it. They may define it as something else, but that would be like part of this conversation, similar to what you're doing, so we can unfold it and understand where they're coming from.
Okay, fantastic. So, based off of this, all right, now that we know where we're starting from, and now that we know where you want to take this, which is create the book, build the lead flow, create the business to help athletes find happiness in their career post sports, right? Now, let's evaluate the two options that we're looking at. We have a journal and we have career transition. If I were to ask you this, and we're talking about an athlete going through career transition so that they can achieve the result that you just mentioned of true happiness, fulfillment in their career.
Mm-hmm.
What is the process that you would take one of these athletes through? When would you want to ideally start working with them? What would you have them do? What are those step-by-step things that the research has told you and that your experience has told you working with this demographic?
Yeah, it's a very difficult question to answer just because everybody has a different entry point.
Okay.
I can name several. I don't want to do that for sake of time, but a guy gets injured, a guy gets cut, a guy gets traded, those kind of moments, right? They're called normative and non-normative transition kind of periods. And I would say to answer this question in an abbreviated way, there's so many different ways that we can kind of get into that entry level. But what I've done is I've created this model. It's, they go from basically the situation that they're in to their self, understanding their personal side of things into a professional. And that professional could be in any different industry depending on the market. Then we have strategies and we have a game plan that we can create. I put them together. Like once you have these strategies, similar to what you're doing, you're giving strategies to equip this game plan that you could then execute. And then lastly, the third, what I call third base, right, would be the support. Who is your support team? Who do you have in your corner? Who do you need in your corner that you don't have? Who's there cheering you on? Who's there acting like this, demon in your corner that is motivating you, but maybe is doing some, more harm than good? How do we create that system for you? And then the other thing is, and this might actually answer one of the questions, is this is going to be like a year-long process, which is where the 365-day journal comes in, right?
Yep.
So integrating the two and understanding that journaling is part of this process. It's about when we started, but giving yourself a year. I think that kind of answers the blend of the first two options.
Fantastic. So what I heard from you was essentially three parts of how you would teach someone. You have the self, you have the strategy, and then you have the support, right?
Situation too. So it'd be four.
Okay, so it's four parts: situation, self, strategy, support.
Yeah.
Okay, you have just essentially created the Superman framework, right?
Mm-hmm.
The S to the fourth power framework, right? You have this framework.
Yeah.
All right. Now this becomes part one, part two, part three, part four of your book. These become your sections, right? Now, here's what's really great. Where does journaling, watch this, where does journaling and the idea around mental health come in? Is that in the self, strategy, support, or situation phase? When would
The
you
entire
ideally
thing.
introduce that?
It's the entire thing.
Great. But let's get specific here. It is the entire thing, but when are you introducing that concept for them to start to do? Is that the first thing you're saying? Hey, you had this injury, you're out of sports, you need to start journaling? Or is it, hey, let's get aware. And then when it talks about self, we need to get our mental health dialed in before we know what to do next? Or does it come after in the strategy and implementation part? Where would you teach them
Yeah.
the mental health and the journaling aspect of mindset?
Yeah. So it's basically understanding who you are in that situation to go from situation to self. And in that wavelength, it would be this assessment period. I'm calling it that because I'm an educator and I couldn't think of a better word. But
Yeah.
really, it's in that phase of like, all right, let's assess. This is where you're coming from. This is income wise where you are. Your wife is, doing this, or your family's here, you're 23, you're 29, whatever it may be, assessing where it is. And then we start that process. Now, the answers to the journal, as we know with every single journal out there, it could be anything, and your commitment to that could lead you to anywhere. So I think just understanding that it starts in the situation going to the self.
Okay, this is huge. Now watch this. Everything you're saying has led to a very, very obvious, that's not always obvious to someone who's going through this, but to an obvious flow. The first book is the career transition book focusing on the 4 pillars. The second book is teased within the first book when you talk about mental health and journaling, and then you create the journal as a byproduct of book number 1. And the way that you can do this is you can do it as a way to generate leads. In the first book, hey, here's 27 journal prompts or 30 journal prompts, one for every day of the month. Guess what those journal prompts will be? 30 of the 365 days that we would create second. But now we're turning them from a reader of the 4S process into starting to be aware of the journaling. Great. Then once we have this book done, you can also create the journal as a complementary workbook to your main book. You could have it as a paid product or an upsell to the book. You can have it as a freebie within the book, or you can turn this journal into book number 2 and officially launch that to build off the momentum of the first book. Do you see how the flow could go from main book of teaching, experience, education to then the journal, which is additional implementation because they trust you as the guy to help them?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's like that freebie thing that you're talking about doesn't have to be free, but like it's an added resource and keeps the building process.
Okay, so how are you feeling as we're breaking this down in terms of what idea comes first, how we break down the idea, and how we tie everything together?
Feel really good. I think a lot of this stuff I had in terms of like, working document, because everything I have is working, right? And I already did the research, so that part is easy. To me, it's about taking, like you just said, that 4 sections was I already was, envisioning, breaking it into, incorporating something like this journal or other things like, stories and, testimonials and, I don't want to say research, but other things that are happening in the world that we can kind of integrate into this so that it reads well and, it appeals to the audiences.
So this is a great next step. Okay. So now when we look at this, right, and we're kind of developing this on the fly right now based on your working experience. Let me ask you this. Do you believe that based on the research, you could educate somebody that would increase the value of their life?
Yes.
Do you believe that based on the knowledge you possess from the research and your experience that you can help an athlete in transition?
Yes.
Okay. And do you believe that if an athlete came to you who said, I just had a major injury, my career has changed overnight, can you help me, Caleb?
Yes. 1,000%.
Then you 100% have the knowledge, the experience, and the skill set to create this book in the next 6 to 12 months, period. Yeah. Okay. So now what I want to do here is I can go super deep in this, but now let's think a little bit more about the process here. Okay. When I like to write books, one of the things I like to do when we outline our books, one of the things I like to do is I like to combine the education with the entertainment. All right. Okay. The education is what are the things you can teach? The entertainment is the stories, the personal experiences, the statistics, and the
Yeah.
fundamental support that helps aid the education. So now you have situation, self, strategy, support. That is what you would take an athlete through, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So now imagine I'm an athlete coming to you, and this is a great way to help kind of outline the education part of the book. But in situation, what are the 3 things that come to mind that you would need to teach them before they would be ready to move to self?
Sure. So one of the things that I'm going to just give you a framework that I work with is called IST. So IST framework is interest, skills, and time management. And we could just call it time for the sake of it. But interest is really getting down to, one of the things that Simon Sinek has phrased as the why, but it's what are you interested in? And a lot of people, in sports will say basketball or baseball, but that's not a thing that you're interested in. That's a thing. It's a tangible object. So what is it about basketball that you're interested in basketball? What is it about playing, watching, coaching, teaching, whatever it may be? And how do we get into those, stems, and I call them stems because it's stems of your interest. And then what else are you interested off the court? Let's say you like to fix cars. Let's say you like to, produce movies or little, vignettes for TikTok or something like that. What about that do you like? What about that are you interested in? We keep going down this whole list, similar to what you're doing, right? Skills. What skills do you have that you had on the court or on the field that we can translate into other? I mean, they're just building out their transferable skills. And then we look at job descriptions later on. That would be the second step of how to flip those job descriptions over and say, this is what you said your interests are, your skills are. This is what a job description looks like, where your interests and skills are displayed. And then time management, we just do a basic circle. We do a pie chart. First thing we do is pull out the phone, see how many hours they spend on their phone. We have 168 hours in a week. For those people who don't know that, you just learned something. And from the 168 hours, we subtract how much they sleep, how much they're on the phone. And then we spend out, this is what else you have to do, right? And this is how much time you have. What can you do with that remaining 14, 16 hours or something like that? And we go from there based off of what they want to achieve.
Great. Outstanding. You got the IST framework within the 4 S's. This is beautiful. Here's what's really great about where you're at. You are not struggling with what to include in this book. Okay? Because we could just outline this for every 4 sections. You break it down and what you're going to teach within each of those 4 sections, and that becomes your entire outline. So an athlete comes in, and you know my background working in sports. So I've worked with a lot of athletes transitioning their careers. One of my good friends wrote his master's thesis on identity as an athlete and leaving the world of sports. And so what's really interesting here is identity comes into play. What you have is like these prelude things to warm them up to the IST, right?
Yes.
To the IST framework. So let me ask you this as we kind of transition here into the back half, because we've covered a lot. What for you is the area of this book that you are struggling with the most, or why haven't you done it? Because it's not the knowledge, it's not the experience, it's not the skill set for you. What is the biggest challenge for you to make this book happen, and why haven't you done it?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that I lack is that I'm not a professional athlete or a former professional athlete. So I think coming at it from my perspective is I know, like you said, the knowledge, I love it, experience and skill set. I know I have that stuff, but I do feel like the voice in terms of my credential is missing for that specific audience. It's not that I don't know what I'm talking about. It's not that I'm not comfortable speaking about this. Clearly I am. It's that audience wants to hear from, and I get it. I totally get it. I've talked to so many athletes. I said, I'm going to do this. And then, that's kind of where the conversation ends because they go, you're not going to be received because of that. So that's one. That would be my first.
Let's address that, Caleb.
Yeah,
let's address that here. Okay. There are 2 things that I want you to understand with this, because there is truth to this, but it's also a major limiting belief of yours.
Oh, of course.
There are coaches at the highest level that didn't play. They just loved the game and they were really good at it. Now, there are always going to be players who are like, well, why would I listen to the guy who didn't actually play at the level that I played at? But also, if you played any type of sports and then you stopped and then you switched your career, you do have an identity shift. It's just not at the same tier of level of competitive level that you're playing. So that's one aspect of it. The second aspect of it, right? The second aspect of it is, in this case, a great way to overcome this is to borrow credibility. So when I was writing my first book, Elevate Beyond, This was like how to stand out in the job market as a millennial. I was writing this book, but here was the kicker. I was in my first year of professional work out of college. Okay. Like I had less than 6 months of real world working experience as an employee for the Lakers. And I was writing a career development book. So what I had to do was I had to answer the question of, well, oh, he doesn't really have all this experience himself. Why would I listen to him? Right? Similar thing, different time period.
No, totally.
And so what I did was I borrowed the credibility of those that had already done it. So I interviewed a professor from USC. That's a title that people pay attention to. I interviewed the founder of a company who later sold for $100 million. I interviewed an NFL athlete to get people excited. I interviewed an Apple employee, a financial, like a wealth management guy. And all of those led to me borrowing their credibility to support what I already knew to be true. And so you can do that same thing. Tap into athletes you've worked with, tap into athletes you've already helped. And you have that ability to then overcome that through borrowing credibility. And then the bonus thing I want to share here is this. In your beginning of the whole book, you address that head on. So in my fourth book, Big Idea to Bestseller, what I did, and this is on how to write a book, I'd literally say in the beginning, I am not the best writer in the world, and I do not plan on being, but I do plan on giving you something that will change your life and help you write the best book that will help other people change their life. And you can make a very clear in the beginning, I don't have this experience of playing in the pro level, but you know what I do have is the experience of studying this, working with athletes and doing this. And I promise that I can share these things. And so in this book, you will hear from athletes who have gone through this, as well as years of research or whatever it is. And now you've created an immediate credibility standpoint. So everything is not as valid anymore. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And it makes a lot of sense. Like this borrowed credibility thing I've never heard of before. I think it's something that I need to do, but the answer to your question was that was one, I mean, you called it a limited belief. It was true. It was something holding me back.
Cool. Is there anything else that you're struggling with that would stop you from writing this book?
A time commitment, but I could work that into my schedule because I'm disciplined enough to do it. I think what I really needed was this kind of framework or template that I could start to, say you need to accomplish level 1 and go to level 2 and level 3 and level 4. That's very much how I am because it's an athlete mindset of the gamifying life. And I have a lot of this stuff to begin with. So I might even already start myself. I'm making this up on level 11, for example. Like I have no idea. But I do have some working documents. I have some things in, you mentioned, I'm just pulling things that stood out, 30-day journal prompt as like a teaser. I already have 30 days. Like I already have it all. So like that kind of stuff is really interesting to me. And I think once I start to see that progress, I could definitely make some headway with it. I think the other thing is this borrow credibility thing that I just learned talks about, how do you get these interviews? How do you do all these things? And then that adds more layers to this that will already fill the book.
Okay, so now as we kind of come full circle here, Caleb, I want to kind of do a little recap here, right? Because you have a lot of these thoughts and all this stuff, and it's kind of all jumbled and we need to organize it. But essentially, if we were to look at your book in one sentence, right? I want you to try to answer this. Where is this athlete starting from? And this is the transition, right? And where are they ending up? So it's not while they're playing necessarily, but it's once that moment happens, right? And you can even address this early on, but I'm no longer playing sports. I'm ready to transition to a fulfilled life with a career that makes me happy, right? That's where you're taking them from the transition to there in this book. And in this book, we're going to simplify the heck out of this. And in this book, to help them do that, you're going to take them through the 4 pillars: situation, self, strategy, and support.
Yeah.
And within each one of those pillars, you are going to talk about, let's say, 2 to 3 concepts. Those are going to become your chapters within those parts. That would be the order of which you would teach them. By the end of the book, they will now have the 4 pillars, the process, right? With the 8 to 12 chapters explaining how to do all those things, along with a couple freebies along the way to further enhance their education. And that right there is your first book, which also ties into the second book, which also allows you to start to share some of the concepts that are likely mentioned in your children's books. All right. That right there is the book. You use that book to give to athletes, to college counselors, to professional teams. That book then lends itself to becoming your awareness around those audience. That audience then hires you. You now have a coaching consulting business helping athletes, full circle here, go from that transition to a fulfilled life with a career. And that is your first book in a nutshell.
Sounds great. I mean, it really sounds like it's coming to life. So, I mean, I can see it. I think understanding that whole framework that you just gave me will allow me to kind of, go through this process. I think then I could look at who do I want to interview, who do I want to bring in to do that borrow credibility thing, because that is where I was, limiting myself. But I
Yep.
think it's easy then to say, this is where you would fit. I need to talk to you. I need to learn from you. I need to get this thing from you so I can put it in this part of the book.
Amazing. Amazing. And so there we have it. There we have it. We're going to wrap up there because we can keep going, but you have
Yeah, we
enough
could.
to go to that next step, right?
Yeah.
And so for everyone that wants to kind of follow along your book journey, and for everyone who wants to kind of maybe learn more about what you do, where can we follow you? Where can we find you and learn more about you?
Yeah, so I'm on X. I was going to say Twitter, but I'm on X. I'm on Instagram. It's the same handle, which is Caleb, CALEB _ Mezzy, MEZZY. I'm on LinkedIn. I would say I do probably most of my, time on LinkedIn, but I am on Instagram. And then the part of my book that I would just kind of say, I haven't finalized the total title, but I do have a consultancy that I was talking about with generating leads, and that's called Grit and Glue. So GRIT and glue. And to me, grit is the hard work. Glue is what keeps it together. It's the cohesiveness, because a lot of people are saying, like, I'm a hard worker, I do all this kind of stuff, but you need this strategy. And I think Grit and Glue might be the title. I have to work on it a little bit to make sure everybody knows what it means, so it's not just ambiguous to everyone. But Grit and Glue is on Instagram, gritglue.com. Those are where everybody can find me.
We love it. We love it, man. Thank you for coming on the show. I
Thank you.
appreciate you. And for everyone who just listened to this, all right, do you see how you can start thinking about your book in a different way than maybe you came into this episode with? Do you see how having a process can be huge? Do you see how understanding where you want to go can be the direction that allows us to pick the right idea? And so if you've enjoyed this and you want to get some live coaching with us on a podcast episode, shoot me a message on Instagram at Jake Kelfer, and I would love to get that in your hands. And if you want to learn our framework of how to write, publish, and launch a nonfiction book to grow your business, then go ahead and text me the word free at 661-669-7363. That's 661-669-7363. And we'll make sure that you get a free copy of our book and you have a chance to be featured on a live coaching podcast episode. There you have it. And let's go.